All right, what's going on, everyone? It's Rob Edward again with Dig Within. I have a great guest for you today, Lauren Monez, also known as the Fermenting Fairy. Now, this is an individual who has healed herself through a diagnosis that she got of Crohn's disease, and it was all through fermenting foods. And now this is her passion and her life's mission to get this information out to people. I'm really excited to bring this episode to you. We had a great conversation, and I think it's something that people can really kind of take away. One, with supporting her work, and two, taking control of your own life in your own regard, because a lot of these different things that we talk about here are things that you can take out immediately in your life, and you can go and make them in your kitchen as soon as you finish this episode, hopefully. So if you do enjoy this, please let me know in the comments who you'd like to see on the show in the future. And also, if you could please follow the links in the description, which will lead you to my newsletter so that I can keep it in touch with you guys in case anything happens to this channel here, because we all know there's craziness happening in the world. And head over to my Instagram. If you follow the link in my bio, there's all of the information there too. And if you could please drop your email in there, that'd be great, because that's going to be the last standing mode of keeping in touch with people should anything happen. So please drop your email in there so we can keep in touch, and please enjoy this conversation. I think it was a great one, and I'm really excited for you guys to listen. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoy. All right, welcome back, everyone, to Dig Within. As always, I am Rob Edward, and today I have a very special guest for everyone. This is someone I've been wanting to talk to for since I first heard you on Crow 777's podcast, because I think your story is something that a lot of people maybe they don't know what could potentially be impairing them from their natural state of being healthy and having a harmonious integration of their entire being through the foods that they're eating. And maybe I'll just start off a little bit about why I connected and resonated so much with your story too, because well, to be fully kind of transparent and honest with this, I have always struggled with my life to be regular. And it was something that it wasn't anything that ever impaired me in any way in my mental health or huge inflammation problems or anything like that. I was never diagnosed with anything or anything like that. I knew it wasn't probably the best thing for me, but I didn't know what to do, because it's one of those things. If you don't gotta go, you don't gotta go kind of thing. But it was definitely, since I was a little kid, me and my dad would kind of joke around about it, but it was something that I definitely struggled with. And with everything going on in the world, I really started to look carefully at who had really great information about this and who was offering really holistic solutions that were empowering and things that the individual can take in their life and not rely on an outside force, which I think is a huge issue that people are struggling with at the moment. And I found the work of Paul Chek and listening to tons of people about these more holistic lifestyle changes, and found the work of Weston A. Price. And since then, introducing fermented foods into my diet, like sauerkraut, and finally getting a part of a PMA for some raw milk, because it's considered essentially heroin in Canada. It's crazy to get anything there.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, and it was just one of those things where, honestly, as soon as I started introducing that into my diet, I saw tremendous changes, and it completely transformed my sort of struggle with that, where I was always usually relying on stimulants and coffee and stuff like that. And even then, sometimes it kind of wouldn't have that effect. And anyways, that's a little bit about my story and why I resonated with you. And I would love it if you could maybe explain to the audience here, what was your journey with this and how has it transformed your life?
It's funny because, we were talking before. My husband is from Montreal. He grew up on, his dad owns currently even a dairy farm, an organic dairy farm in Montreal. So my husband grew up on raw dairy, just straight from the udder. And although like it would be pasteurized after and then sold, but I understand how Canada, reacts to the raw milk. I mean, it's just, and my husband, Ron, is so healthy. I mean, he is like nothing affects him. He doesn't get sick, nothing. And it's definitely because he was raised on that raw milk, with all those enzymes and proteins. So I understand how healing that was for you.
Interestingly enough, you say he doesn't get sick. As soon as there was three maybe things that I introduced into my diet as I was doing the raw milk, and it was a molded berry detox for some heavy metal detox, and also bentonite clay, ingesting some bentonite clay. But those three things, and as soon as I had that milk, I immediately had, I would say now, a healing phase or a sickness that was moving through my body. And it was very interesting that as soon as I started to introduce that and drink it, it had that cleansing effect. I'm now terming it as these sort of things, as opposed to the more disempowering terminology. But yeah.
Yeah. So just a little bit about me. I'm 44 now. And when I was about 35, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And that was a time in my life where I, like, outwardly, if you were a friend or, a stranger, you would look at me and say, wow, she's really healthy, fit. And I had like a full-time job as an occupational therapist. So I had a good career. I was racing triathlons. So like I was part of the 1% loonies who get up at 4 a.m. and ride their bike 50 miles and then work a full day and then come home and swim 2 miles. I was doing that. And people were like, wow, she's really fit. And inside, I wasn't feeling well, especially around 35, where I started getting really, really sick. And I was training for a couple of races. And I just thought it was overtraining. So I would back off a little bit of my training and I would just never get better. And I was progressively getting worse, where I was going to the bathroom with very rapid diarrhea. I mean, I would eat and it was through my body within seconds. So I was not absorbing anything. I had, food was just going right through me. Literally, I had chunks of food. I could see what I ate, which is a bad sign. Sorry to be so graphic on our first podcast, but
no,
people need to know this.
Absolutely. And
right.
I think it's a shaming thing as well. And I think more people struggle with this than they let on. And
Definitely.
it's all about getting the information out and how to correct these things, as opposed to shunning them and making it seem like they don't exist.
Right. Yeah. And we have to normalize poop. We have to normalize it. We have to normalize talking about it, because it's if not like the most important function in our body, So anyway, but we can get to that another topic. But so I was going to the bathroom up to 20 times a day, sometimes more. It got to the point where it was very difficult to leave my house. I canceled all plans, no social events, because I was scared I was going to show up at a friend's house and then be in the bathroom all day or all night. So I became like a prisoner of my home. I didn't want to go to work. I had to go to work, but I carried toilet paper and pants and underwear with me because I started having accidents. And that was hugely embarrassing, especially I was just about to marry a man that I thought I was in love with. That didn't work out, but I was planning a wedding and here I am, having accidents at 35. I was incontinent. So I became a prisoner of my home, a prisoner of my illness. I didn't even know what was happening at that time. And I would go to see doctors, Western, Eastern, homeopaths. Nothing was really determined until I got a colonoscopy and they determined that I had Crohn's. And again, like up until that point, I was never really I never had a disease and I never really had medication except for antibiotics when I was younger. So coming out of the procedure, I'm waking up out of it and the doctor is saying I have this lifelong disease that's incurable, literally saying this to me as I'm coming out of like this drowsiness. I'm like, what is Crohn's? I've never even heard of that. And he's like, well, it's incurable, but some people live an average life and, you'll go to doctors, you'll be in and out of hospitals, you'll be on medication for the rest of your life, but you'll live, it's that kind of thing. Like you'll live an average life. And I was just floored. So got this medication, started taking it, went home. And within a couple weeks, I would say that the medication was helping just a tiny bit, but I was still going to the bathroom a lot and I was having side effects from the meds. I was on both heavy steroids and heavy immune suppressors. So one day I went to Barnes and Nobles because I thought my diet would have something to do with this. Meanwhile, my doctor told me that my diet would have nothing to do with it. And I was very, very underweight. So he said, just go home, eat anything, eat ice cream, eat rice, eat bread, just gain the weight back and you'll feel much better if you gain weight. So I knew that that was a red flag though, because I knew food always had an effect on my body. So I went to Barnes and Nobles one day and I found this beautiful book. It's have you heard of the Paleo Approach by Sarah Ballantyne?
I
Have you heard
haven't.
of the book?
No.
Okay. It's like an encyclopedia and it just popped out at me, and it's maybe 500, 600 page book. Like reading through it, little paragraph sticks out at me and says fermented foods could be good for an autoimmune disease. By the way, for your listeners, Crohn's is thought to be an autoimmune disease. I think differently, but we can leave that there for now. And so I thought, okay, well, let me change my diet according to Sarah Ballantyne, the author of this book. Changed it a little bit. Not much, happening there. Let me add in fermented foods. So I go to get a jar of sauerkraut from the health food store, take one bite, and I had this like beautiful, like rush of energy. It's like, I liken it to a Kundalini awakening, like with that energy, just like surge, my whole body just came to life. And it's prana, it's the microbes that just boom, gave me life like immediately. And I just connected that to something really, really powerful and something really meaningful. And I had to go there. So I went deep into what are fermented foods? Like, what did I just ingest that gave me that powerful feeling? And I continued to eat the sauerkraut and my stool started forming. I started going to the bathroom less, started feeling better, more energy. And
Was that
that's
quite
when
immediate?
I was like, yeah, I mean, it was within days. Okay. And all I was doing was having like about 2 tablespoons a day. And that was it. So it was immediate. And then, I really dove headfirst into the science behind fermented foods and what really is Crohn's, because when you look at what it is, on Google, it's autoimmune, it's incurable. It's your immune system overreacting, or your immune system attacking itself. I was like, you read all this stuff that's so horrific about autoimmune diseases and Crohn's specifically. And then I put 2 and 2 together and I said, well, okay, so they're telling me to suppress my immune system by taking these meds, because they are saying that my immune system is the perpetrator, right? That's the reason why I'm having all these issues, because my immune system is overreacting. So suppress it. And then I thought, well, but don't I need my immune system? Like, there must be some kind of inflammation in my body. And, inflammation is a response because there's an underlying issue. So I started like really like untangling everything that I was told. And it just was like this huge awakening for me that, my immune system is not broken. It's not attacking my own body. I just merely have dysbiosis. I needed better microbes, because a lifelong childhood of having recurring UTIs put me on antibiotics at least once a month. That did not set me up for success as an adult. I was also a cesarean C-section delivery. So I didn't have my mom's microbes, vaginal microbes. I had her skin microbes. That was the first introduction for me. So that all plays a role in the Crohn's manifesting in my early or mid 30s.
Yeah, and it seems it's interesting that it goes right back to birth, like you were saying. It's not necessarily something that just develops in your body. Just I'm just going to attack myself now. It's something that really can start off from the beginning. And it's not to say, obviously, that everybody who has a similar experience to you with a cesarean section or the like, it's just it could be another causative factor. And I think that the huge problem that we're seeing in a lot of ways in the world today is that we're focusing so much on effects and how to mitigate effects without understanding what the cause is and trying to mitigate the cause, right? And
oh yeah,
you were saying autoimmune, and I was wondering if you could. It's very interesting that I believe every doctor, be it allopathic, natural, or homeo, sort of does have this understanding that there was this quote by Hippocrates saying, "Let food be thy medicine," and it just seems like now it's "Let thy drug be thy medicine" kind of thing, right? And it's interesting that you say that you healed this through your gut and ingesting actual good alive food with good bacteria and stuff like that. But that's shunned and saying, well, that can't possibly work because it's not fitting the model. But it's like, but isn't one of your central tenets to let food be your medicine kind of thing? It's interesting that that's kind of the case. And I was wondering, you were mentioning that it's an autoimmune disease and that you have changed your mind on that. And I was wondering what your interpretation of what it actually is and what could potentially be the cause that's having these effects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's well, all autoimmune diseases stem from an underlying, I mean, you just don't have an immune system that goes haywire for no reason. Again, it's like everything that the body presents is a response to something else, right? So the autoimmune disease is never the disease that's causing it, right? It's never the immune system. It's never the Crohn's. It's never that. That's all response. Even inflammation, it's a response. So what is the body doing? Like what's happening? Go to the deeper layers and the deeper layers. And then what you find in autoimmune diseases is you find that they're the underlying, and really all diseases, that there is an imbalance in the gut bacteria and the microbiome, and there is leaky gut. They usually come together. I mean, I rarely ever see a dysbiosis, which is, I'll just explain dysbiosis in an easy, understandable way, is your microbiome should have a healthy ratio of good bacteria and then the opportunistic bacteria. And I like to call them opportunistic because they're not bad. They coexist, right? They all coexist. The healthy, the opportunistic, which are also healthy when everything's in harmony. But then when there's an insult or an injury to the microbiome, then you have the opportunistic bacteria that can turn pathogenic and they can wreak havoc on the body. And then that causes a whole downstream of symptoms, responses. So dysbiosis, that's what dysbiosis is. You want a lot of healthy probiotic bacteria that coexist with the opportunistic, possibly pathogenic bacteria and other microbes. You want that healthy ratio. And in dysbiosis, it's flipped. Okay, so you have the opportunistic they're really ruling the roost. They're calling the shots, the opportunistic ones, and they're creating all sorts of things. First and foremost, leaky gut. And then you have food particles, toxins, heavy metal buildup, everything that shouldn't be leaking through the gut wall is now leaking through the gut wall. And then your immune system, who's right on the outskirts of the gut lining, reacts. And then you create antibodies and, you have all sorts of like pro-inflammatory cytokines, because your body is responding to an imbalance. You're not supposed to have a gut wall that's letting these large particles through into the bloodstream. And so, that's the response. And that's what Crohn's is. It's first and foremost a dysbiosis and a leaky gut. That's what everything is. You can't tell me that there is any illness or any disease in the body that doesn't have an underlying cause of dysbiosis and leaky gut. But they won't say that. So what do people do? You know, there's a 5-year-old who gets diagnosed with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. They put him or her on meds to suppress the immune system. And then it makes the dysbiosis even worse. They get sicker and sicker and sicker. They don't have an immune system to help them, you know, fight any kind of inflammation. And it's just an absolute disaster how the medical system views autoimmune disease specifically, but any kind of disease, really any kind of illness. Because, you know, in actuality, we're not sick people. Like we're not in sick bodies. We just have an imbalance. We have to figure out where that imbalance lies and then give the tools to the body, like I did, fermented foods, and boom, like I got healthy. I didn't get healthy right away. It was an up and down roller coaster, but I had a lot of healing to do. So yeah.
It's interesting that I find that the more I'm looking into this, the more I'm seeing that if it's not physical or it's not quantitative in terms of the modern scientific method, if we can't see it and we can't measure it, it doesn't actually exist. And the problem really with a lot of these things is that it's internal, meaning that it's inside of your body. So you can't physically look at it. So we chalk it up to some miraculous thing that, oh, the body's attacking itself or something like that. But then on the external, you would say, you know, could you imagine waking up with a broken arm in the morning? And, oh, that's interesting. That really hurts. You know, well, it's just your body just attacked itself throughout the night. Now you have a broken arm. And it's like, well, no, there had to have been a causative factor here. How did I break my arm? But
right.
For something that's internal in your body, they just go, oh no, it's your body just attacked itself. That's it. That's the way it kind of works. And we have this problem, a logical fallacy of authoritarianism and appeals to authority and things like that, white lab coats and stuff. And they just believe that that's the case. And it's just so interesting that we use this method of dissecting information on one side and not the other. And it takes someone such as yourself to kind of go, there's something else here. I need to explore this further. And I think that I can take control of this as opposed to forever, for the rest of my life, relying on this thing, like you said, which is a vicious circle of your gut bacteria is, I guess, impacted in a certain way that's negative. Yeah. Take this antibiotic or this pill, which further creates a problem, which then makes you dependent on the actual quote unquote solution, which again is just this cascading effects of I guess, like you said, dysbiosis.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I said to myself, like while I was going through trying to really figure out what was going on with my body, is I realized that inflammation was a big part of this. Because Crohn's and ulcerative colitis are inflammatory bowel diseases, right? So they have inflammation, and as does everything in the body. Every illness, every imbalance will have inflammation, because that's just what the body does when it's off of homeostasis, right? So I said to myself, I broke my arm. I broke my arm like 10 years ago. I fell off a bike and I broke my arm. Well, that was inflammation. I said, but I didn't take any meds for that. I didn't suppress my immune system for that. I just let it heal, and it healed within like 6 weeks. So what am I doing to my gut? If my gut is inflammation, isn't it the same thing? And then it was like, oh my God. And I went into my medicine cabinet, threw them out, those meds, all of them, and was like, that's it. I am my path. I don't care if I die. I literally said that to myself. I don't care if I die. I am not going to ruin my body with these synthetic, man-made, multi-trillion-dollar pills. I just won't. You know, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go. And it was a path of getting really sick, at moments thinking this was it, I am going to die, moments of bouncing back, taking 5 steps forward and then 2 steps back and thinking, oh my God, am I going to get sick again? And then 5 steps forward and then 1 step back and then 5 steps forward and then no steps back. And finally, it's like I'm healthy. And it just took a lot of commitment, a lot of being okay with dying, being okay with, if this is it, then it's it. And trusting, without a doubt, that it's not my time to go, and that I know I have a better path. I know I have, more meaning in this life, and to trust in God and to trust that my body has a divine purpose. And that was it. Like, I healed.
It's interesting you say that. I can't tell you how many times that I've looked into this out of my own curiosity to develop something like this podcast and some of the things that I'm developing soon, to have this transformational experience with people who are interested in becoming better. A lot of people such as yourself have been at that crossroads of, I don't care anymore for life and death. I'm going to pursue this and see what happens, and trust that this is the case, and that my intuition is in alignment with my being. And they pull on the other side. You mean, you have Jennifer Daniels with turpentine. You've got one of my very good friends, Tom Barnett, had the same thing with understanding his damages with certain pharmaceutical problems. So I guess we'll just leave it at that, so we can still put this on major platforms. But it was that idea of, I don't care if I die from this, because it couldn't be any worse than potentially what's happening, or doing this for my entire life. And to carry your analogy further with the broken arm, is you also had to set the arm so that it would heal correctly, right? Which again, I find is probably analogous to you understanding that a good gut bacteria and a good microbiome is something that would heal the effects that were happening because the causative factor was out of alignment. And I was just wondering if you could maybe dive into what actually are fermented foods for people who probably don't know, and who really may not have an interest in the conversation that we're having. Why are they important? What are they? And what are some things that they can sort of take control of immediately, and something that they can really kind of dive into this almost as soon as they kind of turn off this podcast?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, even if you have never intentionally had fermented foods, you probably have. Cheese is fermented, beer is fermented, wine's fermented. I think almost everyone has had a pickle. Who hasn't had a pickle, right?
Nah, it's funny. That's the only one that I don't. It's just something about. I think it's a thing when I was growing up. I don't know, pickles. I can't do personally, but.
Really? Oh, okay. You haven't had my pickles.
Yeah. Well, maybe. Yeah. Potentially. Yeah.
So, but anyway, the fermented foods are so prevalent in the world, not necessarily our society. They're getting more and more, but in the world, every single culture has staples that are fermented foods. So, basically what a fermented food is you take one type of food, and by way of the microorganisms, they alchemize the chemical properties in that food to turn it into something else, another type of food. And they do that by lowering the pH. They do that by changing, the certain microbiota, because that's a microbiome too. When you create a fermented food vessel, that becomes a microbiome. So you have certain microbes at one point of the fermentation process, and then, a couple of days later, you have other microbes. So it's consistently changing. And so it's really true magic. It's true alchemy at its best. And so I like to give people this visual, if they can't understand it. If you take a head of cabbage and you leave it on the counter, just a head of cabbage, you leave it on the counter, in 3 or 4 days, it's going to brown, it's going to oxidize. And then a week later, it's going to pretty much be mush, right, on the counter. It's going to be dead. So that's not fermentation, that's rotting. As opposed to, you take the same head of cabbage, chop it up, and you submerge it underwater with a little bit of salt, and you take away oxygen, because the head of cabbage on the counter was intermingling with oxygen. That's why it was oxidizing and turning to mush and rotting. In the fermentation process, you take the head of cabbage, you submerge it underwater with a little bit of salt, and that basically, it doesn't rot, it becomes sauerkraut. Cabbage becomes sauerkraut. That becomes a fermented food because there's no oxygen. It's an anaerobic process, and you have all the lactobacilli and bifidum and other wild yeasts that love a non-oxygen environment, and they alchemize that head of cabbage that would have rotted into this beautiful, super nutrient dense sauerkraut.
And so what does happen when that process takes place and that alchemy, when you ingest that? What happens in your internally in yourself when you do ingest those things? What is it that makes it so powerful and such a healing process?
So many things, but if you can understand that that head of cabbage, when it's fermented and turned into sauerkraut, the microbes, the microorganisms that were produced from that head of cabbage, and let me just go back for a second, because what we do is a wild fermentation. So that's really important to know, because we take an organic cabbage that already has microorganisms on the skin and inside the cell walls. And then we submerge it underwater, and those same microorganisms start proliferating and changing and doing all sorts of alchemy. So instead of, let's just say yogurt, which is a controlled fermentation where you have some milk and you add, the maker of the yogurt has to add in freeze dried. So that's a controlled fermentation, as opposed to the wild fermentation, which is what we do. We get it straight from nature. So when you ingest it, the microbes have already broken it down. Okay. So it's as if someone already chewed your food for you, because they did. So your body does not have to go through the immense processes of breaking down food when you eat a fermented food. That's why when someone's healing from some kind of disease or trauma, it's really nice to introduce fermented foods, because your body doesn't have to use all this energy to just digest a few bites of food. It's already pre-digested. And what that means is it's already broken down. So the nutrients that are involved in, let's just say that cabbage again, are released. Again, it's like having someone chew your food, and it releases all these vitamins and minerals and nutrients and macro and micro, and then you ingest it, and your body then, because it doesn't really have to do much, it becomes more bioavailable. So you're getting, not only are you getting the microbes, so you're creating more diversity in your microbiome by ingesting the fermented foods that have the microbes in there. Your body is absorbing more of the nutrients as if you just ate, let's say, coleslaw, which is not fermented, it's raw cabbage. You're barely, even if you have the best digestion possible, most likely not going to get any nutrients from that cabbage. And people are going to fight me on that like crazy, because they think that vegetables are loaded with nutrients. You're not getting any of those, because first of all, they're loaded with anti-nutrients, most of them. And when you eat a raw vegetable, you're getting more anti-nutrients. You're not getting the nutrients because it hasn't been broken down. And most humans don't have the bacteria to break down carbohydrates like that. So that's why our ancestors fermented foods, right? They fermented their veggies, they sprouted, they soaked, they did everything to alchemize, right? And to degrade the anti-nutrients so that the nutrients can become more bioavailable. And that's what fermentation is.
Yeah. And not to mention, you were saying about One of the things I've really been paying attention to as well is mentioning that earlier, that science is very quantitative, but every single thing that's important in your life is qualitative. It's all about
Mhm.
quality. You never say, oh, I'd rather date this person than that person because on paper, when I am, this number here, they equal that number there. So it's a very logical and systematic way of saying that we are very compatible. It's not the way it works. And with
Mhm.
everything in your life, it's the same way. And again, not to mention, I've obviously heard you talk about this on different platforms as well. And something I'm very interested in now after studying Weston Price's work and Paul Check's and stuff like that as well is the soil quality and everything like that. And it's very disheartening what is happening with our farmland and our soil and
Mhm.
just the kind of lengths that we might have to go to reclaim the nutrients that we've lost in some of those things. So not only is it just the fact that you might not be able to break down those foods, it's also where are you getting them and how are they grown? Because a
Mhm.
carrot isn't a carrot. It also is dependent on where it was grown and how it was grown and all that all that different stuff. So I don't really know where I was going with that rant, but I'm just curious what you kind of thought of that, and also what then, because we were talking about sauerkraut, and what are some of the major, I guess, staples of fermented foods and the things that really helped you in your journey and that people can kind of introduce, I guess, in their diet going forward.
Mhm. Yeah. So, I mean, I would say sauerkraut's probably the most available in terms of what people can find at their local health food store. It's got the least amount of crap added to it. So if you find like a kefir on the shelf at your health food store, it's going to have sugar added to it. It's going to have emulsifiers. It's going to be pasteurized most likely. So it's it's really difficult. In my opinion, there's a hierarchy of ferments. So you have, the most healing, and then you have the least healing, which is also pretty toxic. So for me, and I would say I'm pretty right about this because of my experience, the most healing is kefir. Um, it's God's drink. I mean, there's nothing that kefir can't heal. I'm pretty convinced of it. And but there's just, unfortunately, if you look at all this, the societies like Russia, Ukraine, like Eastern European countries, those people grew up with kefir, like the real kefir. They're having like the milk, raw milk kefir, and or goat milk kefir, and they're healthy, like robust people. They have
Mhm.
healthy skin. They're usually like very strong, like sturdy people, and that's because they grew up on kefir, and it's so much a part of their diet.
So what is kefir then, and what are the differentiating things that you're trying to separate here between what you should be doing and what you should be avoiding?
Yeah, thank you, because it's good that you're asking me these questions because I assume people know. So kefir is a fermented milk. So you can ferment any kind of milk, whether it's a cow, a goat, coconut, almond, plant-based, dairy, whatever. You can ferment any kind of milk. And when you do that, it's called a kefir, but you have to use a very specific fermentation stimulus. You have to use certain microbes, and those are called kefir grains. You can get them dried. I would not recommend that. Of course, you always want a living micro. You always want a living community. So kefir grains look like these little curds, and they're communities of wild yeast and wild bacteria. And when you take those curds and you drop them in any kind of milk and give it about 24 hours and then take the grains back out, then you have a kefir. And it's super simple. As long as you're not making like a plant-based milk. We make our coconut milk in-house. So like, because everything has emulsifiers in it and I didn't want emulsifiers. So I just developed a coconut milk recipe. So that's why our kefir, there's a lot of labor involved. So, but kefir in general is a really easy thing. You take the kefir grains, drop them in, 24 hours later, take them out, and you have like the most wonderful drink. And the reason why kefir's like the highest in terms of the hierarchy is because first, it's got the most biodiversity. It's got the most amount of different strains. They say at least 50 exist within the kefir grains. And that's a lot, like we're talking, you take a probiotic supplement, you're not going to get 50 different strains, even in a pill. So that's a lot. And the cool thing about kefir microbes is that some of them will become your resident microbes. So they'll commingle with your resident microbiota instead of 2 or 3 days and then you pass it through, so you can actually build your microbiome with kefir grains, with kefir bacteria.
And is there
that's why. Mm-hmm.
Is there a caveat here with it being raw unpasteurized?
Yeah, I mean it. So what you'll find on the market is you'll have pasteurized milk, and then you'll have added in kefir. But I can guarantee you, like the big companies like Lifeaway and Maple something, those are the ones in the big like kefir plastic bottles. Guarantee you they are not using kefir grains. It's not agreeable to scaling a $1 million company. So it's usually like smaller companies using them. So yeah, you want it raw. I mean, raw milk kefir is, that is gold. And I do a raw coconut milk kefir because I didn't want to have dairy when I was healing my body. So I developed this coconut milk recipe. So yes, you definitely should get the raw version. Raw milk version.
So, and you just mentioned there that while you were healing yourself, you didn't want to have dairy. Is there a step? Have you developed some sort of step-by-step process, or would you recommend anyone who's either going through these problems with things like Crohn's or any other gut inflammation problems, or people wanting to take more control of their gut health just in general? Is there again, you're talking about a hierarchy of, you're saying kefir is at the top, but is that something that you really want to come out of the gate with at the beginning of your healing process?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. Oh yeah. Kefir right away. And you want to start slowly because there could be a die-off effect, the Herxheimer reaction, which is when you ingest a bunch of healthy bacteria, and then they start taking up space in your microbiome, and then the unhealthy or the ones that are causing the issues start to die off. And so you might have, if you have any kind of leaky gut, then you might have a reaction like feeling like a cold or something like that for a few days. So you do want to start all ferments pretty slow. Most people don't experience that, some do. So yeah, kefir is always the one that I recommend first and foremost for anyone with any kind of imbalance. And also, it's the one that I recommend for maintenance too. Like I drink my kefir every day. I do have sauerkraut every day. I have applesauce and I have lemonade. I don't have those every day, but I have them every now and then. So people ask me, once my gut is healed, then what? Like, do I have to continue taking, ferments? And I say, yeah, it is, because our soil is so depleted. We're not getting the microbes that we usually would from vegetables. And we're introduced to so many toxins in the environment, in our homes, everywhere, that even toxins here in the head, lots of negative thoughts and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So you have to really keep up with the microbiome, because it can change. Every 3 days we have a new microbiome. And it can either be advantageous for you or it can be disadvantageous. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And it does become addictive is not the right word. It's the first thing that came to my mind, but you start to want to really support your gut health as well. And that when I started having sauerkraut, we started making it, actually ourselves with good salt, and now we have some actual whey that's unpasteurized. Obviously, we're separating ourselves from the milk, and it's like you said. When I first started, it was it was almost like a punch to your taste buds kind of thing. It hits you, and it just you know that it feels very, very good. And it becomes like, honestly, it becomes like candy. Like some of the ones that we do, when it turns out very, very well,
Mhm.
it's I could honestly eat an entire bowl of it, because it starts to taste like candy kind of thing. And I use it to top off with most of my meats and stuff like that too, now without doing any condiments and stuff like that. So it's really helping me for that kind of regard. And it's not really something that, if you understand that you heal yourself with something, you don't really then
Mhm.
throw it away and go, no, that was fun. I'll just kind of
Yeah,
throw that away now. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, that was done. I'm healed.
Yeah.
Like, no, you need to keep up with this, Yeah.
One question I really wanted to ask you is, there's a huge push definitely for things. I remember the first thing really that I heard that was a fermented food or a living food and all that kind of stuff is kombucha. And
Mhm.
it's usually, myself included, made fun of by a lot of people that are, it's essentially the really health conscious people that are slamming kombucha, people who are very much in tune with like their inner nature and all that kind of stuff and whatever. They're just, oh, kombucha is very good for you because it's healthy bacteria and it's a live food and all that kind of stuff. However,
Yeah.
I'd love it if you could maybe explain maybe what kombucha is, for one, and two, what you kind of want to watch out for in either purchasing it or making it yourself, and the difference between, in general, commercially and store bought products that are fermented versus what you might actually want, what you were talking about with wild fermentation.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I was talking about that hierarchy with the kefir being at the top. Well, guess what's at the bottom?
Really? Okay. Yeah.
Oh
Interesting.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, fully that's kombucha's at the bottom of it. Because look, if you go from soda, if you go from beer, wine, and then you start drinking kombucha, and you're going to feel great. Like you're going to be like, wow, this stuff is amazing. Because it is like you're going from like, you know, crap to, and I'm not calling beer and wine crap, which it is, but like, but say, I don't know what you were drinking before, but definitely kombucha is a step up, most likely. However, there's certain things that are not great for the body that kombucha has. And kombucha is fermented tea, and it's usually green or black tea. Um, so first of all, kombucha will have a high yeast profile. There's certain ferments that will have like more bacteria and some wild yeast. That's what kefir has. It has like a lot of probiotic bacteria and some wild yeast, which I like. Our body has more bacteria than yeast. We do have wild yeast. We do have candida. Candida, when it's in balance with the rest of the microbiome, is not a problem. In fact, it does a lot of healthy things for us. And so we do want yeast. But when you're drinking kombucha, which is mainly yeast, and it's mainly the yeast that's similar to beer, you're getting way too much yeast. You're changing your microbiome to have way more, yeast than it really needs. And so after a while, you're going to get yeast overgrowth because it's just, they're not being kept in check, by the bacteria. So most people, I would say the people who are drinking kombucha every day or several times a week, eventually are going to, lend themselves to a yeast overgrowth. You'll find that in the nails, like nail fungus, in the nose, you'll have some fungus in the nose, you'll have vaginal issues. It can present itself in funky ways. So yeah,
I've kind of
maybe.
noticed just in my personal, I've become very in tune and cleaned up a lot of my diet even before a lot of this has been opened. My eyes have been open with everything that's going on in the world. And I gave up a lot of fizzy drinks and all that kind of stuff. And anything, I knew that there was just preservatives and all that kind of stuff in it anyways. But one of the things that really hit me, because I had given up fizzy drinks and things like that, is it was just so, even the first time I had it, and it was
Mhm.
commercially and again store bought, and it was so sweet, and it still
Oh
had,
yeah.
it had the same effect that I was. It's funny when you give up sugars, and especially white sugars and all these high fructose corn syrup and stuff like that,
Mhm.
you become very much aware when it's in something after you haven't had it for a while. And it immediately when I had it, I was like, this is just not, I don't know, kind of not swore it off, but I was like, I don't really dig kombucha because it was just so overpowering that it just felt very commercialized too. Is
Yeah.
am I on the right track there?
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's why people who come from soda really love kombucha, because it maintains that sugary taste. You know, like your taste buds are so prone to sugar and sweet that when you switch to kombucha, most commercial kombucha, you're going to get that sweet taste again. Um, and the reason why it's so sweet and so sugary, especially for people like you and I who have changed our taste bud, you know, complex to be leaning more towards tangy and sour, which are more of the healthy taste and umami taste, the sugar, what most kombucha companies are doing to scale and to get the carbonation is that after the fermentation process, you have to add sugar to the tea, because the microbes in the little kombucha SCOBY need something to eat. So they eat the tea leaves don't have sugar. So they eat the sugar that you add. But hopefully that gets fermented out. But what commercial kombucha companies do is they add sugar at the time of bottling. So they're ready to bottle the kombucha because it's already fermented. They add sugar, bottle that up, and then it gets all bubbly because the sugar will excite the microbes, and then they'll produce all sorts of gases like carbon dioxide. And then you open that kombucha and you've got all that fuzz. Mm. But the other thing that commercial kombucha companies are doing, even water kefir companies are doing, is they're adding CO2. So they've got these big pumps and they're pumping it into their big vats. So they're adding fake CO2, which pisses me off because, you're skipping steps in the fermentation process. If you really did a true fermentation, you wouldn't need to add that. Like our lemonades are super fuzzy. We don't add CO2. In fact, like I can't keep them tamed down at all. They're so excited. We have like too much fuzz sometimes, or fizz. So if you do like traditional real fermentation without skipping steps, and you don't need to add CO2, you don't need to add sugar. But unfortunately, this is what kombucha has turned into. Yeah.
Well, it reminded me there because I was experimenting recently because you were talking about beer and stuff like that. And it's interesting to pay attention to some of your health, but also enjoying spending time with friends and family and stuff like that, and indulging. Yeah. And I looked at things like mead, which is just fermented honey. And I was curious if, could you do a certain kombucha or some sort of drink? Because half of it too is it's extremely sweet. So it's definitely like a dessert wine. But again, if you don't really want to potentially have a fermentation that's alcoholic, is there some sort of like kombucha that you could use that would be your sugar would be either a honey or a maple syrup or something more natural?
Sure. I mean, that's what mead is. It's a kombucha with honey. Or June, right? Are we talking about June? Maybe June is the one that has the kombucha with honey, I think.
Okay.
I'll have to double check that. I'm honestly, to be like completely like transparent, I'm not a kombucha expert.
Right.
Because I have no interest in it. The only thing I have interest, and I get asked all the time, can you make kombucha? I say absolutely not, never, because there's nothing about it that's really healing to me. And in fact, people always say to me, can you get too much fermented foods in your body? And I said, with kombucha, yes, you can definitely drink too much kombucha. Mm-hmm. So, I'm just not an expert. I know what's not good in kombucha. I don't know like the different like variations of it too well, but it also has caffeine. A lot of people don't know this. But it has caffeine, and a lot of caffeine. So I say this to people and they're like, oh my God, that's why I can't sleep at night, because I drink kombucha all day. Mm-hmm. It has caffeine, and that's not good for the body. My computer's about to die.
Do you have a different source? Like, do you have a power source?
Yeah. I have to go get it though?
Sure. Yeah. No problem.
Okay. I'll be right back.
Okay. So just while Lauren is taking a second here to to power up her computer. I just hope that people are really sort of seeing the powerful effects that you can take in your own life to really take control of your gut health. And it's not something that you need to rely on anyone else to do so. You can really take that initiating factor yourself. And I was just trying to fill up some time there and showing and trying to explain that a lot of this is essentially, it's very, I find why I wanted to reach out to you too, is it's very empowering to the individual as opposed to relying on external things, especially with companies who are, we see this with organic labels and stuff too, right? Which is they buy an organic label and nothing in their process is organic, sort of like clothing where it's made in the USA and it only has to touch 3 USA things or, you know, whatever, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I was just curious. So we've gone to the top and the bottom, but can we go through maybe the rest of the pyramid that you have?
Yeah. I would say sauerkraut, kimchi, probably right below the kefir. Well, you know, something that's not really like commercially available, except for in my company, is a fermented applesauce. That's one of the things that we just came out with last year. And that is, I mean, I wish more companies would do it just to have it more available, because that is chock full of massive nutrients, and the microbes love it because it's apple. You know, there's a lot of sugar in apples, so they go crazy. It's very, very high in probiotic activity. We actually add our kefir to help the fermentation process. So it's got the kefir microbes plus the microbes from organic apples. So if you can get a hold of that, you know, through our company, if you can find it somewhere else, I don't know of another company doing that, but that's the kefir. And then the applesauce is right below that, because that's got the quercetin from the apples. It's got the pectin from the apples. It's got loaded microbes, really good for babies. Like, it's baby food, you know, and it's good for people who can't digest solid food. So elderly, and it's good for people who have a lot of gut issues and they just can't have solid foods. And then any kind of fermented veggie is uber healthy. So you have like the cucumbers, which are pickles, you have fermented carrots, you have the sauerkraut, the kimchi, any kind of fermented vegetable is going to be really, really incredible for your health. Water kefir, I would put right above kombucha, especially commercial water kefir, because they're doing the same thing that kombucha companies are doing. They're adding sugar at the end, so they get the bubbles. They're also, you know, and everyone has to understand that I've shared kitchens with companies who are literally doing, like, I've seen it with my own eyes. So I'm not just making this up or guessing. I've seen it with my own eyes, what companies are doing nowadays, even small companies. So they're catching on to having to scale, but skipping steps and scale and save money, save pennies, you know, have a bigger margin, but not have it be such a healthy, you know, product. So water kefir, not the best. I would say it's a step above kombucha. What's also happening in the water kefir in the kombucha world is you'll see an ingredient called Bacillus Coagulan. And this is interesting because I'm doing more research around this. Bacillus Coagulan is a spore-based probiotic, a spore-based bacteria. And so it's used in products that have been pasteurized. It's used to extend shelf life. It's used in non-food products. You have it in like paint and other things. Like, it's really weird. Because it like extends shelf life. Yeah, you can see, because it's considered an additive, not a microbe. It's considered an additive, which is interesting, just like an emulsifier is an additive, because it does something to better the food in terms of more profitability. So water kefir companies and kombucha companies are adding this Bacillus Coagulan. And what that does is that basically, I think they're most likely pasteurizing it and then adding back this Bacillus Coagulan and calling it a fermented food, which is not really a fermented food because and then also you have these juice companies. So when you see a juice that has on the label of it probiotic, you look on the ingredients, it's going to say Bacillus Coagulan. When you see a protein bar that says probiotic, Bacillus Coagulan. When you see a protein powder that says, probiotic, it's just like, it's a way for companies who, have nothing to do with the probiotic world, but they want the profit from it. They add in Bacillus Coagulan, thinking that the consumer is going to think that they're doing something good to their gut when they're not.
Yeah, it's interesting. This might be a bit of a side tangent, but things like protein powder, because I'm a young guy and I like to keep in shape and stuff like that. And I used to do all those protein shakes and whatnot. But after researching what they are, what they do contain, and again, just thinking about the natural idea of a powdered thing that has all this protein in it, and then you ingest that just by shaking up a bunch of water, it doesn't make any cognitive sense, kind of thing. And since updating my diet to be more primal and more ancestral, it's kind of awesome. Like sometimes after my workouts, because I have raw milk now, I just put a bunch of eggs in it with some milk and a bit of honey and maybe a bit of really good jam that we've made as well, and I get like a milkshake after I work out. But
that's amazing.
Yeah, and it's but whey protein, right? You have whey protein, which again is the separation of the curd and the whey from milk. Which, first off, if it's pasteurized, it's a problem there. But then two, there's also whey protein that has dairy isolates and stuff like that. So it's almost like you have the whey, you put it through this process, and then you get rid of the dairy kind of side of it. It's like at the end of the day, what are you ingesting, right? It's crazy.
Yep. It's the same thing with wheat, right? And we think that gluten is the issue when it's really the wheat that is the issue, because it's stripped of all of its nutrients. Not only is it stripped of all of its nutrients, it has anti-nutrients. It's stripped of its good stuff, and then you consume the anti-nutrients like the phytates and the lectins, and then people blame it on gluten, which gluten does cause an issue in some people. But let's look at the wheat first. Does someone have a gluten sensitivity, or do they have a wheat sensitivity that looks like a gluten sensitivity? And then, like you say, like we add in something, like it's enriched because we add in iron, we fortify it with vitamin D, or we add in nutrients. But if you had just kept it whole and wholesome, then you would have gotten all the B vitamins, you would have gotten, all the carotenoids, like the antioxidants, but of course, like they have to strip everything of its nutrients, and they meaning big food. And then you enrich it again, and you market it to the consumer as it being healthy, when it's not healthy, because now you're eating something that's completely stripped of any kind of nutrients. Plus you're getting the anti-nutrients that aren't broken down. Plus you're getting the synthetic vitamins and minerals that they put back in. You're getting synthetic iron. And you better believe that if you're eating cereal that's fortified, or cereal that's enriched with iron and D and whatever they're putting in there, you're going to have metal buildup. You're going to have, heavy metal toxicity.
Yeah, and that's something I was thinking about too. With I love ancestral supplements, and I think Heart and Soil has other things as well, which are domesticated and dried heart, liver, kidney, all that kind of stuff. But again, it was one of those things where I found a really great farm near me called Wild Meadows, and they do things like nose to tail ground beef, which I think is great because you're getting heart, liver, I think a bit of kidney, and maybe tongue as well. But you're getting all of the animal there too. And Weston Price was a famous story about him. A zoo got this really prized tiger, and they thought that, well, okay, if this is the case, then we got to get really, really good cuts of meat and all these kind of really, really great muscle meats and stuff like that. And it started to lose its hair, and its claws weren't really functioning properly. And they went to Weston Price and they said, what's going on here? And he effectively said, have you ever watched a tiger maul something in the wild? It doesn't eat the muscle meat first. It eats it from the inside out. It's the organs first and then all the muscle meats. So basically stating that. And for me, again, with people working out and trying to be healthy and trying to improve protein intakes and stuff like that, gain more muscle mass, liver has more protein per ounce than any other food. And yet we have tons of bodybuilders and people trying to be healthy, just slamming down chicken breasts that are off the bone, no taste to them, dried out, and all that kind of stuff. And it's like your liver would have all of your protein, tons and tons of minerals and vitamins and all that kind of stuff. And it's not really, it's not known. And it's one of those things where, like I was saying with the ancestral supplements, is that it's great that people are offering those things, but you can go to your local butcher and get it yourself and dice it up. Like with my milkshakes that I was saying, I sometimes have, is I just dice up liver into bite-sized pieces and just slug them down like a vitamin, right? Then you don't have to
That's
cook
what
it.
I do too.
Yeah,
That's what I do too. Yeah. I get it from a farm in Texas, beef liver. And I chop it up into little pieces and then I freeze them. I put them in like little packets, put them in my freezer. When I want to take one, I take it out, let it thaw out, and I take them like a supplement, just like that.
Yeah.
It's easy. I don't
That's
have to
awesome.
taste it. I don't want to taste it.
Yeah.
I don't have to. If I just take it like a supplement, it's great, you know?
Yeah. And I wanted to bring this around too, because actually talking about that, one of the great books that I was reading was, I think it's We Want to Live. There's We Want to Live and The Recipe for Living Without Disease, both by Andres von der Planets, who I was turned on to by Tom Barnett. And he's totally raw meats guy and all that kind of stuff too, which is, it's a iffy subject with a lot of people. But a lot of his formulas and stuff like that for children and babies had to do with raw unpasteurized honey, raw unpasteurized milk, and things like domesticated liver, blended up if they wanted to as some food for babies. And I was wondering if you could maybe speak to some of the misconceptions with that, and what about youngsters and babies with things like fermented foods, because we are told, you know, that's so unbelievably dangerous. And what's your response to that?
Yeah. I mean, I get questions every day, like, can my child have fermented foods? And I don't know, like why. I mean, I guess from the whole kombucha craze, maybe, and kombucha having, you know, some high amounts of alcohol, maybe that's where it came from. Like you can't feed, you know, a child something that has alcohol in it. But also it's the whole like terrain versus germ theory, where doctors will tell you fermented foods are a big no. Like, why would you? We're here to kill the bacteria. Why would you ingest them? You know, and that they're dangerous. They're dangerous. Like even, you know, I had my business in California first, and now it's in Florida. And fermented foods are on the danger list because you can't start a company at home. Whereas you can, if you baked cookies, you know, or if you made salads, then you can start a company at home and then move into a commercial kitchen. But for fermented foods, because they're so dangerous, according to the FDA, you have to get into a commercial kitchen like right away. So, you know, like our whole entire world and system is built on this thought process of the microbial world being really dangerous. My whole family is they're in New York, the New York area, and they're all doctors. My dad's a doctor, both sisters, everyone's Western doctors, and they won't have my products. They just won't. They won't, because it's crazy. Like, why would you ingest bacteria? Like, you know, we kill them. So, you know, and then we get to babies. We get to, if you see, like I did this when I first started Fermenting Fairy, I was at a farmer's market in California. And I started catching on to the children and the babies who were coming by. They would come by with their moms and dads. And the kids would just take to the sauerkraut right away, or the kefir right away. Mommy, I want more. I want more. And I would watch those children. And first of all, they were the healthiest looking children I've ever seen. They gravitated towards the sour and the tangy right away. It wasn't even like, ooh, like they didn't even make a face. It was like, yes, give me more. Those were the kids that were vaginally born and breastfed. And I specifically asked the parents, you know, how was that? And I made a connection. The kids that were C-section, formula fed, they made that face, they turned away, they smelt it. No, you know, and they weren't like the healthiest looking children. Now I don't want anyone to get mad at me. And you can have very healthy children from a C-section formula fed, for sure. But just with my own personal study, that I became aware that the children who were vaginally born and breastfed had children who automatically took to the fermented foods. And that's because their microbiome was really healthy right away from the start of birth. So that's all to say fermented foods. My fermented foods, I can't speak for, to anyone else, but my ferments are very healthy. Children love them. I would say, don't be afraid to give your children, high quality ferments. And it's actually really good for them because children will tend to have a hankering for the sweet because other kids in school, like they bring candy and stuff like that, and they see kids wanting candy. And when you have certain ferments in their diet on a daily basis, it'll keep their taste buds sort of balanced so that they won't always gravitate towards the sweet and the sugary. And that's very, very critical to get them to appreciate all kinds of flavors, all kinds of tastes early on, because then they grow up to be adults who love all kinds of flavors, all kinds of food, even the umami and the sour and the tangy, which are the healthiest foods on the planet.
Yeah, that's great. It's something that it's a difficult subject to broach for a lot of people because there is so much information on the other side of that, preventing people from even being capable of opening their mind to another aspect of that or the other side of the story to that. So I do want to be mindful of your time, but I'm really curious. There was one thing that you mentioned in one of your interviews that I listened to that I don't know if you went into it there, but I'm very interested in this topic as well, which is you mentioned something about being emotionally tied to your illness. And I don't know if it's something that you remember or I find that that's a very interesting topic. And it's something that people might be struggling with, even though they might not be consciously aware of, again, having that tied to being unhealthy or being in that space where you have a crutch, as it were, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's what you were getting at, but that's what I was interested in kind of exploring further with you, because I think that it's an interesting topic where people can use certain illnesses or certain things that they're struggling with as to be emotionally tied to them. So I was wondering if you could maybe touch on that for a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Because we always talk about like the diet and like the physical form of food as being, either the cause of the disease or the healing aspect of the disease. So, and I would say 40% is diet of healing. 40% of healing a person's illness is about, what you're ingesting. The other 60% is, your mental capacity, your emotional capacity to, understand like what's really happening and why, especially a chronic disease, someone who is chronically sick for most of their life, like there is something, to the emotional side. There's something that you are getting out of emotionally by being sick, because I don't believe that the body is sick for a lifetime. I think you have an imbalance. And if you can get at why it's present, it heals like that. Okay. We're not meant to live a lifetime of illness. So, what I like to ask are very triggering questions. And one is, what are you getting out of by being sick? And people will say to me, it's a very profound question. Somebody asked me that when I was sick with Crohn's, and that's how he was a friend of mine and actually a guy that I was interested in dating. And I was so mad at him. I'm like, you think that I'm bringing this on? Like, you think that I'm causing this? And then like, I threw him out of my house because he asked me that.
Yeah. Natural reaction.
But then a couple of weeks later, I'm like, wow, like I journaled on that, and it's profound. It really is profound, because for me, what it was is I was getting attention. Like I was getting the attention from my family that I never got when I was a young girl. And anytime I was sick, I'd get phone calls from them because they lived in New York. I lived in California. I'd get phone calls. I'd, get cards in the mail or something. I would get attention. I would get the kind of love that I was looking for. I would get the kind of nurturing. And when I wasn't sick, I wouldn't get that. And I needed that because I thought that I needed that from my family. I thought that when my dad loved me, I was a good person. I thought that when my mom loved me, I was Lauren, without really knowing that I am who I am without needing anyone else's love, and that's self-love. Like that's the ultimate self-love. And I am a divine creature. I am made of God, whether or not my family gives me the love that I want or need. And so, but that was really the ticket to me letting go of being sick with Crohn's. Because after I realized that, I watched my patterns. And when I would get sick, I would call my mom, and then I stopped doing that. I would get sick and I stopped contacting anyone. I stopped contacting my friends. I stopped telling people I was sick. I stopped, and I would just be sick on my own. I was just sick on my own. I didn't have to tell anyone because I didn't want the attention that was really kind of manipulative and fake on my end. And lo and behold, like I started getting better because I wasn't seeking validation or seeking attention from outside of me. So that's one question, is what do you get out of being sick? And the other one is, who would you be if you were healthy? And those are the two questions that are really good for journaling, for meditating on, and really like trying to unravel what's behind the illness in an emotional way. Because I can tell you right now, it's not just about food.
Right. And I think that that's some of the problems that I feel like when people hear things like the germ versus terrain theory, what they hear is you deny disease. What you're saying is that no one's ever sick and that disease doesn't, inflammation or whatever doesn't exist, which is not what's being said. It's just saying you need to change your conception, your framework around this, because again, you could be the entire factor of why you're sick too. One thing that I was thinking about when you were saying that was it's your ingestion, your physical ingestion, your food ingestion, but it's also the ingestion of your thoughts, right? Those are just as much as something that you're integrating into your body as you think them. So those are hugely important as well.
Right. And also unlearning, like what I'm figuring out now, especially in the last 2 years that we've all been going through this craziness, is that it's all about unlearning. Like that's what is making me the woman who I am today, is someone who's really, really comfortable in her own skin, comfortable in my body, comfortable in who I am. And that's because I have unlearned and I've untethered myself from what people have told me that are about myself. Like a guy told me when I was 20 that I'm not smart enough. A doctor told me I would never heal from Crohn's. And my mom told me certain things. My dad told me certain things. I needed a 9-to-5 job. I couldn't be an entrepreneur, like things like that are all true. People, all told me that. And I had to let all that go. And here I am today. So it's all about unlearning and discovering what beliefs you're holding on to that are someone else's. Like I could go a lifetime thinking I'm not smart enough because somebody told me that when I was 20 years old. And here I am at 44 saying, yeah, you want to see? Okay. I've built a company. I'm doing podcasts. Yeah. And it's just like, I am smart enough, smart enough for who? For him? Maybe not. Good. Perfect.
Yeah. And I think that that's exactly what you're speaking to as well. Cause I found this as well too, with the way that my life has turned out, is I looking back on it now and doing this reflection as well, I enjoyed complaining about the situation I put myself in, because it allowed me to sit in it and pawn off the responsibility of making my situation different to someone else, to something else, because it was too much. It was too much for me to accept the responsibility that was said, okay, well, there's no one here that has made this decision outside of you, and there's no one who can fix this situation outside of you. So it was, I just know I really wanted to get your opinion on that. And I really appreciate your answer, because it was something that I struggled with too, which was, I like this. I like complaining and being like, well, it's not where I want to be. And it's this, that, and the other thing. And it's all these outside factors, which again is what you're saying now, is proving to yourself that you can do these things, and why I'm doing this now too. And developing things so that I can help people transform out of those patterns and into these new empowerment patterns. Because again, it's exactly what you said too, is a huge tenet of what I really appreciate from Paul Chek's work is, what do you love doing? What are you willing to change for? Because yes, you have a thyroid problem or whatever it might be, but do you enjoy what you're doing for work? Because if you don't enjoy that, you're slugging through the day, you're slugging down all these stimulants and coffee and stuff, you're draining your adrenals, which is draining your thyroid, and that's your problem. It's not your thyroid, it's the fact that you hate your life. So what do you want? What are you going towards that you're willing to change for? And that's going to address your problem, not a thyroid pill.
Yeah. Yeah. And we live in such a sick culture that it's normal to get together with a friend and be like, God, I feel like shit, and I'm so tired, and I didn't sleep well last night, and I'm just like, I don't know what to do. Should I take this medication? And here you are, like, you guys are talking about how sick you are and how you don't feel well. And it's like, misery loves company. This is the society that we live in. So I like to tell people to just like, stop telling people that you're sick. Just stop. Just if you need to, just be sick on your own. You don't need to get together with a friend or your family and tell them how sick you are, because it's a crutch. You're manipulating yourself. You're manipulating that other person into wanting something from them that's not clean. And also you're letting your illness lead your life. And instead, if you get together with a friend and you bite your tongue because you really want to talk about how sick you feel, and instead you talk about how wonderful the coffee is and the weather and it's beautiful, and you just like shoot the shit, you'll see that you'll start to heal. You will start to heal, and there's no way that you won't, because your energy and what you put out into the world says everything about your body. And if you consistently tell the world that you're sick, you're going to be in a sick body. And then also the fake it until you make it. I used to go to parties and just like fake it. I was feeling like shit, but I would fake it to the point where, maybe I do feel good. Wow. Like I actually did feel good for like 5 minutes. And then you take that 5 minutes and you build it into 10 minutes, and then that 10 minutes becomes 20 minutes. And then that 20 minutes becomes a whole day where you felt good. And then that whole day becomes a week, and it's like, you take little snippets of when you actually felt good and you build on that instead of the week that you felt like shit. Don't build on that. Take one time, even if it was 30 seconds where you felt good, build on that,
I absolutely love all of that. And I could not agree more. And I found with cleaning up my diet and stuff like that too, it was one of those things where it was a complete qualitative shift in feeling more in tune with my body, my emotions, my intuition and stuff like that, where it was just little things would happen. Someone would mention something that I was just thinking about, or I would listen to something and then it would run through my head, or someone would say something and then I'd hear it directly later on a podcast, so whatever it might have been. But it was just like, those little pings where you go, interesting. Wow. I think I'm in the frequency now to understand that came from that, as opposed to everything's when you truly shift your perspective like that, you start to look at things and understand that you're creating all the problems that are in your head. And when you just shift like that, you just start to, like, things for me, I started just to go, yeah, there are things that are wrong and there's things that aren't really going the way that I want to, but I don't really have control over that. So maybe if I go in this direction, then I can feel more empowered in that way. And then you just stop seeing the roadblocks and you start seeing all of the ways in which you can make change and you can add value to people's lives and things like that. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
there was one thing, one of the guys that I really look up to is Tom Barnett, and he was my first guest, and he offers a lot of solutions. And one of the things that he said that I think was great, which is it is important to eat right, and it is important to pay attention to this, where your food comes from, and if you're eating preservatives and all that kind of stuff. But the difference between paleo and keto and this and that and all these different diets, one of the things he mentioned was you shouldn't really need to tell people too much about your diet. It should essentially be your diet effectively should be something that, what we were talking about with your one love, or what do you want to accomplish, it should be always dream affirmative towards where you want to go. Is this going to, if I ingest this, is it going to help me get to where I want to be? Or is it going to make me feel a certain way where it's going to be dream negating, where I'm not going after what I want to do? So I'm wondering, with that caveat, what you maybe think about that in terms of people nailing themselves into a coffin of vegetarianism, veganism, paleo, keto, and going, this is the correct way or whatever, as opposed to going, you just got to do what's right for you and what works for you. And then with that caveat, what does your typical day look like now, maybe versus your initial journey through your Crohn's? I was going to say battle, but I'm trying to choose my words carefully now with everything we've been talking about too, is when you were healing your body. That might have been long-winded, but I'm wondering if you can maybe pick up on some of that.
Yeah. So I think like putting a label on anything is really dangerous. And that's what I'm talking about, is like unlearning and undoing. And that's all labels. So if you choose to eat vegan, I would suggest don't label yourself as vegan, because that puts you in a box and that makes you really small. Same with, ancestral. I mean, it's the same thing. If you want to eat paleo, it's, like, let yourself be vast and as big and as huge as possible. And that means that you're not labeling yourself anymore. I think it's a slippery slope to put a label on any kind of diet, because I myself, I've been vegan at points. I've been vegetarian. I've been heavy meat eater. I've gone through it all without the labels. I just give my body what it needs. Leading up to the diagnosis, I was vegan. And I think that definitely played a role. And then I started eating a lot of meat, and that worked for a while, and then that didn't work. And so then I went back to a little bit more vegetables in my diet, less meat, and that kind of stabilized me. And now now what I do is I have like a lot of animal meats. I have a lot of animal fats. I'm huge into animal fats. I love butter, like raw butter, tallow, lard, ghee. I love all of that. And it's a really big part of my diet. Eggs, duck eggs. And I eat really nice, like beautiful homemade sourdough. I have a loaf sitting right there. I have a kefir sourdough now that I just put out, a new product. And I have my ferments, my wild ferments. I have some really high quality liver, grass-fed, grass-finished beef, elk, venison, salmon, wild salmon. That's the majority. I eat white rice with bone broth. I eat pretty ancestral, right now. But again, I don't put a label on it. So the fact that I barely eat vegetables, I have potatoes and sometimes carrots. And I go to the bathroom 3 times a day, perfect bowel movement. So you do not need vegetables to go to the bathroom, folks. So just a reminder there. So yeah, that's my diet right now. I feel like I'm thriving. I love it. But I know maybe a year from now, it might change. And I like to stay very open to possibilities of change.
Yeah, I think that's hugely important too, is to pay attention to the way your body is feeling as well. Like bone broths for me were huge. I love them, and they're so tasty. But throughout the summer, I didn't really want them because it was hot and I didn't want to ingest that. Right. And it sounds obviously very rudimentary in my thinking of course, kind of thing. But again, it's eating in cycles. And one of the things I did have a question for you in regards to that was, being in Canada, eating seasonally and being able to gather all of the right nutrients and stuff like that in your diet that's more ancestral and not really relying on grocery stores and stuff like that, especially with potentially what could be coming down the line with that kind of regard. But
Mm.
the only other thing I really wanted to mention was I've been noticing that what's happening in health and wellness and in the way that the world is operating is it might I can only nail this down in my own thought process to the industrial revolution,
Mhm.
but especially the technological revolution as well too is there's a corollary that we're doing now where we're talking about the human body as a machine because most of the things that we're moving towards are machine like, and it's taking away from what you were talking about with dysbiosis and symbiosis with
Mhm.
actually talking about us as an ecosystem or a part of nature. And it's almost like we're getting classified as not a part of nature and we're a part of the machine world. And
Mhm.
I didn't really have a question for that one, but I'm just wondering if you can maybe expand on that if you felt that that resonated at all.
Well, I think if you look in the dictionary at the definition of nature, I forget like the verbiage, but humans are not included in it.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, exactly. So that, I mean, no more comment on that. Like we are not considered part of nature. And that's the problem is, the further we get from nature in how we live, like the first thing we do when we wake up is we check our phones, right? We put on shoes or slippers that disconnects us from our environment. We live in a box. We go to work in a box in our car, and then we work in a box all day, and then we come home to our box. And like we're never really barefoot, rarely ever get the sun. I cannot believe I live in beautiful Central Florida, and when I go for a walk in the middle of the day, even when it's not hot, people have their blinds drawn, like everything's closed. And Ron and I, my husband, we're like open, like even in the middle of the summer when it's 110 degrees, we're like windows are open, everything's open, we're never in shoes. Like we have such a disconnect right now. Like we're not getting the sun's rays in our eyes to, adjust our circadian rhythm. We're getting blue light, computers, phones. Um, so, this is where we're going. And I feel a revolution where we're going back to nature as much as possible. And I'm grateful because COVID, definitely woke a lot of people up. So, yeah, it's just the further we get from thinking that we're not nature, the sicker we're going to get. Yeah.
Yeah. And to sort of wrap up then, what would you have, you kind of hit on a lot of stuff there, so I can see how might be a leading question, but what would be some tips for people to take from this that you might be able to give them in terms of getting better with their gut health and just feeling more a part of nature and natural cycles with the way that
Mhm.
the world is going right now?
Yeah. So I'll just give you like a few easy things. One is when you first wake up in the morning, like literally roll up, open your eyes, um, get out of bed and do what you need to do, but go right outside. Don't turn on your phone. That's pretty much the worst thing that you can do first thing in the morning. Is to get that blue light, obnoxious, like inflammatory blue light in your eyes. If you do what you need to do, go right outside barefoot. I don't care if you're living in concrete, go barefoot on concrete and just get the sun's rays in your eyes. Even if it's not sunny, it's cloudy, you're still getting that natural light. That's going to set you up for circadian rhythm like throughout the entire day. That's going to
Mm.
set you up for good sleep later on that night. It's going to set you up for good digestion. It's going to help your microbes. So that's first thing is go barefoot outside and get natural light. Don't turn on your phone. Don't look at a computer until like, if you can control it, at least a half an hour to an hour until you're fully awake.
Mhm.
And then, so those are two things. The third thing is to eat wild fermented foods every day, some form. And the fourth thing that's super easy is to take cold showers, to get some kind of cold therapy, cold water therapy, because that's really good for building stamina, strength, everything, metabolism. Cold therapy can really be very healing, very changing, like life-changing for people. And it's easy. You just turn your shower to cold for 2 to 3 minutes and you're good. You're going to feel like gold.
Yeah, very, very good for your internal organs as well to kickstart them and say, we need to heat ourselves up here. We need to be able to do this kind of thing. So it's a recharge for your internal organs as well. And it's one of those easy things where you just go, if you don't like it, then just do it a little bit and go right back to hot and warm up and then get out,
Right.
just suck it up and do the whole thing. But, dip your toe in, as it were. So with that, I just wanted to, we were talking a little bit beforehand about this, and obviously there's not really enough time to go into it too. And I do want to cover this in some of my podcasts with bringing on people that are more versed with the whole PMA side of things and the public versus private, everything like that. But to let people know how they can find you, how they can find some of your stuff and order from your site. And I know a PMA is a part of that now. And if people don't know, it's a private members association, which is how Lauren has structured her business nowadays, or had to kind of operate in that kind of regard. So I was wondering if you can maybe just hit on that. What does that mean for people if they want to support your work and buy some of your products? And then where can they find you and what kind of things do you offer? And I'm really interested in the sourdough starter as well. So
oh, it's so good. So you can find us. We're only selling online right now. And I know you're in Canada. We do ship to Canada. We do ship worldwide. You can't do it from our website. So you have to email me directly.
Okay.
So we're selling only on fermentingfairy.com. And where were the? Oh yeah, so we are structured as a PMA, a private member association. We're actually a ministry of the scriptures of nature. We're all beings of nature and God, and so we're structured as a ministry. And so when you buy our products, you're actually donating money to our ministry. So it's seen as a donation instead of a purchase. And really, that's it. I mean, it's just we operate like any other business. We're just unincorporated. We don't follow, the jurisdiction of the state or federal law. And nothing changes on the customer side. You're a member, not a customer. And it's a free membership. You don't need to purchase. You can, even if you're just on my email list, you're still a member. So that's it. Instagram, I'm on fermenting.fairy, and my website is fermentingfairy.com. But thank you so much for having me on.
It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I love touching on these sort of things and offering solutions for people to really take control of their lives in their everyday, right? These are things that the products you provide are really great, but things like sauerkraut, it's just, you can make it in your own home as soon as you kind of get off this listening to this too, right? So it's definitely things that people can take control of as well. So I cannot thank you enough for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope everyone really enjoys this and they go and support your work and become members. And I just wanted to ask, is there any other parting comments or anything like that you want to add before we take off?
No, I think you were excellent. Like, you asked me like amazing questions. So I appreciate you giving me a platform and giving me a voice for telling my story and allowing me to tell people, about my healing products, because they've helped so many people. But getting the word out, is the most challenging part, as is, for any business and marketing and that kind of thing. So people like you with a podcast and interviewing me and having a great, exchange and great conversation, it's key to life. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. And your story is very important, and it allows people to see that there are transformations that they can make in their own life, and they can initiate that themselves. And through conversations like this, they can understand that there's options available, and it's all about their own ability to take control of their life in that way. So thank you again so much for your time. And to everyone else, please like and support if you find this advantageous to you and all that kind of stuff. And we will catch you on the next one. Thanks, guys.